So good morning. May I ask you to take the seats and we will start the conference. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests. I would like to welcome you on the first conference organized to the honor of the winner of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize with the title Civic Society, Freedom is not to be taken for granted. The winner was announced on Monday in Strasbourg during the General Assembly of the Parliamentary Session of Council of Europe, just after 1 month, when for the first time met the selection panel of the prize in Prague. The selection panel, chaired by the President of Council of Europe, Jean-Claude Mignon, consists by 6 respected and experienced persons in human rights. They discussed near to 30 nominations from 19 different countries. The selection panel chose 3 finalists: the Georgian organization Young Lawyer Association, Chinese Right Defense Network and Belarusian dissident Aleš Bialyatsky, who finally was announced as a winner of Václav Havel Human Rights Prize for this year. The prize represents a medal, diploma, and a sum of 60,000 euros. We are happy that we invited representatives from all 3 finalists to Prague, but suddenly I have to say that Mr. Aleš Bialyatsky is not with us. He is currently jailed, and it's our great pleasure to invite in Prague his wife, Mrs. Natalia Pinchuk. You will have the opportunity to listen to the panel chaired by Martin Palouš, the board member of Václav Havel Library, who was a member of selection panel of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. The Václav Havel Library is an institution established with the aim to save and develop Václav Havel legacy. It's a center for documentation with a digital archive of documents, photos, videos, and other materials, mostly accessible openly via the internet. We collect materials about Václav Havel, who was an author who became famous thanks his theater plays in the 60s already, and who was an active citizen, later a dissident and leading figure of Charta 77, and finally, the last Czechoslovak and first Czech president. The library has a great collection of Václav Havel translations to different languages, a collection of samizdat, which he organized, and contextual literature, which he offered to interested people in our research room. The Václav Havel Library have its publishing program. Some of our production you can see here. To our international guests, I can apologize that we are still on the beginning and our production is mostly in Czech, but definitely we will be better next time. Third part of the Václav Havel Library program consists from events oriented to culture, philosophy, politics. We organize monthly about 15 different events like readings, discussions, performances for the audience, not only friends of Václav Havel, but academics, journalists, young people. Those are held in our space where a small permanent exhibition about Václav Havel is presented for public. As well, we organize conferences discussing topics like presidency, Europe, European identity, or international seminars, as this year's seminar, which was devoted to the Czech philosopher Jan Patočka. The Václav Havel Human Rights Prize is our really international event. The aim is to bring visibility on Václav Havel legacy globally. The nominations for the prize are open globally, and our partner Council of Europe is a great institution with strong history and great respect in the human rights field. We started the cooperation with Council of Europe last year when, just in this time, in the beginning of October, was installed a bust of Václav Havel, which we commissioned in the main building of Council of Europe. The bust was installed beside other important and influential figures who have had a significant influence on European project and European values. I mentioned beginning of October because October 5th is the 77th anniversary of Václav Havel's birthday. I have to really thank the Council of Europe that we succeeded to organize the prize really in time. I started the negotiation with them late November, when the President of Council of Europe, Jean-Claude Mignon, wrote me a letter with an idea to rename their Human Rights Prize after Václav Havel. It was him who came with the idea and approached Václav Havel Library as an institution who already prepared Václav Havel Prize project. In January, I went with FRANTIŠek JANOUCH from Charta 77 Foundation, who is our Czech partner, to Strasbourg. In March, we signed the contract about the cooperation, and the prize was announced with the deadline for nominations in the end of June. Ladies and gentlemen, this is for the first time where we are meeting each other by this occasion. We prepared a program of the conference with few selected topics. First, we would like to talk about Václav Havel legacy in the field of human rights, and our other panels will be focused this year on human rights NGOs under state repression and the tools which can help to strengthen the human rights. As part of the conference will be moderated interview with the representative of 3 finalists. In this moment, I would like to thank our preparatory team who helped us not only conceive the program of the conference, but more, who helped us to invite our guest who will speak today. In the team, there was Veronika Bajgarová from Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Czech Republic, Igor Blaževič, the head teacher at Burma Educational Initiatives and founder of the One World International Festival focused on human rights, Marek Hudema, journalist, Vladislav Janduk, member of the US-based Belarusian government in exile, Monika Lagmanová, lawyer focused on public interest law, protection of human rights and philanthropy, Jan Macháček, the chairman of the executive board of Václav Havel Library, journalist, economist, analyst, musician, and Charta 77 signatory, Lucie Reitingerová, who cooperates for a long time with the Václav Havel Library, Ondřej Soukup, journalist specializing in countries of the former Soviet Union, Petruška Šustrová, journalist and columnist focused on Poland and countries of the former Soviet Union, Charta 77 signatory, and Martin Vidlák, the head of the documentation center of the Václav Havel Library and cooperator with Václav Havel. I would like to thank to our partners, Council of Europe and Charta 77 Foundation, who are with the Václav Havel Library organizers of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. I would like to thank to our sponsors of this conference, Zdeněk and Michala Bakala Foundation, Václav Havel Prague Airport, and finally, I would like to thank Václav and Dagmar Havel Foundation Vize 97, who host us here because it was Václav Havel and his wife, who is the founder of the Václav Havel Library and who brought to life this old church from ruins. And they created here this beautiful space named Prague Crossroads. This is a space for meetings and events as it is planned today. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to wish you a great day, and I hope that Václav Havel, as a symbol of solidarity, human rights activist, and author of the famous essay Power of Powerless, and not only, will be a strong source and inspiration and empowerment to your life and life of your friends and colleagues. I would like to invite here FRANTIŠek JANOUCH from the Charta 77 Foundation.
Dobrý den, dámy a pánové. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dobré утро, дамы и господа. Узнав, что эта конференция билингвальна, я решил в честь первого лауреата премии Václava Havla сказать вам пару слов на русском языке. Я сразу после смерти Václava Havla чувствовал себя морально обязанным учредить премию Václava Havela. Почему я чувствовал себя морально обязанным? Мы с Гавлом переписывались, переписку вы можете увидеть там, на 600 страниц, наши письма, те, которые сохранились. И я вместе с ним учредил в дискуссиях, в переписке, в телефонных разговорах из Стокгольма в Прагу, из Градечка, его, там, где находится его дача в Стокгольм, мы учредили 3, фактически 4 премии, которые существуют до сегодняшнего дня. Первая это была премия Тома Стопарда, это была его идея. Том Стопард решил дать нашему фонду какие-то деньги, и Гавел пришел с идеей, давай будем учредим премию Тома Стопарда. Такую немножко секретную, никто не будет знать, кто ее присуждает. И мне всегда дали вот лауреата, и я сообщил это в масс-медиям, так сказать, в прессу, и он получал от фонда Хартии 70 деньги. Вторая премия была очень важной, когда Ярослав Сайферт получил Нобелевскую премию, и когда он год спустя умер, мы учредили литературную премию, которая до сих пор самая престижная в Чехословакии, Ярослава Сайферта, которая тоже учреждалась, и Václav Havel был одним из членов им пекоре, то есть тайным членом жюри в Праге. И потом была еще премия Франтишка Кригеля, единственного чехословацкого политика, который отказался, будучи пленным в Москве в августе 1968 года, подписать московский так называемый протокол, правильно назвать его диктат. И, наконец, это была премия Доминика Татарки, которую мы учредили после его смерти в 1989 году, но она сейчас передана в Словакию, и ее присуждают в Словакии. Так что мы долгие годы с ним учреждали премии, и когда он ушел из жизни, было ясно, что это мой моральный долг. Я очень рад, что нам удалось связать усилия вот наших организаций, библиотеки Václava Havela и фонда Хартии 77 с Европейской парламентской ассамблеей в Штрасбурге, Советом Европы. И я думаю, и они тоже очень рады, потому что они учредили премию, которая как-то не могла соперничать по престижу, по значению с премией с премией Андрея Сахарова, которая присуждается в Брюсселе. И поэтому вот эта идея назвать ее премией Václava Havla за права человека и присуждать ее комитетом жюри, которые, лучше сказать, комитет Нобелевской премии тоже присуждается комитетом, который состоит как из представителей Европейской парламентской ассамблеи, tak i v bibliotеке Václava Havla и в фонда Хартии 77. И вот сейчас, после, так сказать, тщательной и довольно, я бы сказал, обширной переписки, и пришло много предложений, по-моему, 27, и, наконец, мы выбрали Aleše Běleckovo, который, к сожалению, не смог принять премию лично, но я должен сказать, что я был очень взволнован, когда видел после речи его жены, которая его представляла, Натальи Пинчук, что все члены Европейской парламентской ассамблеи, около 400 человек, из 47 стран, наконец все стоя приветствовали, аплодировали вот решению присудить первую премию Václava Havela Alešu Běleckému. И это было очень волнующе. Должен сказать, что не все сразу встали, некоторые, так сказать, не хотели остаться сидеть последними, по-моему, но наконец стояли и аплодировали, как говорили в России, бурные, долго продолжающие аплодисменты. Я хочу закончить свое выступление с одним эпизодом из наших контактов с Václavом Havlом. Мы не только переписывались, но и перезванивались. Я уверен, что многие из наших телефонных разговоров были записаны тайной полицией на пленку и переписаны потом, но, к сожалению, как файлы Václava Havela в секретной полиции, так и мои были уничтожены сразу после бархатной революции, и поэтому там не сохранились. Но сохранился один телефонный разговор, который Václav Havel, обычно звонил я ему. На сей раз это было 4 октября 1989 года, поздно вечером, вдруг в нашей стокгольмской квартире позвонил телефон, и там оказался Václav Havel. Я включил записывающее устройство и после окончания этого разговора переписал этот разговор. Он был не очень продолжительным, и Havel о нем забыл. Когда мы готовили нашу переписку, я спросил его, показал ему, он с большим удовольствием прочитал, говорит, вот я забыл совсем. И я вам закончу свое выступление этим кратким разговором. Осенью 1989 года журналисты из всех стран мира, включая норвежских, были совершенно уверены, что решение о присуждении Нобелевской премии мира пойдет в Прагу, и что получит его Václav Havel или движение Хартии 77, или еще был последний вариант Václav Havel и Jiří Gájek, бывший министр Придубчика иностранных дел, тоже один из глашатаев, как говорили в России, Хартии 77, и человек, который прошел 5 лет в концентрационном лагере. Ну, говорили, что наверняка получит. Это имело бы логику. В 1975 году ее получил Сахаров, 7 лет спустя получил Валенса, No i тут by i всегда это имело весьма положительное влияние на развитие в этих странах. И вот казалось, что... И значит, вот вдруг... Значит, я прочитаю вот. Это ты, Франтишек, говорит Вашек, знаешь уже что-нибудь? Отвечаю, что мне ничего не известно. Каждый здесь думает, что это будет он. Или Гаек, или они вдвоем, или, возможно, Хартия. Но никто не знает ничего конкретного. Норвежские друзья в этом убеждены, говорят, что настоящей новостью, real news, было бы, если бы Нобелевскую премию мира не дали кому-нибудь из них. Вашек говорит неуверенно. Знаешь, у меня силы кончаются. Просто падают от усталости. Здесь вокруг меня толпы журналистов, десятки телевизионных каналов требуют у меня интервью. Что было бы, если бы я ее получил? Я просто не знаю, что мне делать. Я их выставляю, отказываюсь давать интервью, но они торчат здесь с самого утра, и я даже не успеваю прочитать газету, и уже должен комментировать нечто, о чем я совершенно ничего не знаю. Каждый человек хочет, чтобы я ее получил. И если бы такое произошло, то перед нашим домом были бы толпы людей, огромное сборище. Но для меня это было бы настоящим несчастьем, трагедией. Я уже не знаю, что мне со всем этим делать. Поэтому я выбрал тебя, человека разумного и спокойного, чтобы отвести душу и чтобы ты меня немного успокоил. В Праге полно журналистов. Иногда я хожу мимо немецкого посольства, толпы людей сопровождают каждый отъезжающий автобус. Тогда был этот экзодус восточных немцев через Прагу в Западную Германию. Я был недавно в посольстве на ужине в американском с Ширли Темпли, она была тогда послом. И когда возвращался, то там было просто столпотворение. И я шел мимо посольства, и мне это казалось абсурдным театром, чем-то вроде гибели общества, вроде конца коммунизма. Прости, что я выбрал тебя, но ты спокойный и разумный человек, а я уже действительно не знаю, что мне делать. Перед моей квартирой стоят целые очереди людей, несут цветы. Некоторые приходят с жалобами, например, на сырость в квартире. Я выбрал себе роль защитника самых несчастных и обездоленных, поэтому я не могу сказать, что не буду этим заниматься. Я сам создал эту репутацию заступника за всех обиженных, сам это пропагандировал и провозглашал. И вдруг оказалось, что мне трудно справиться. Просто не знаю, что делать. Мне необходимо немного отвести душу. Прости, что я тебя выбрал для этого. Ну, я ему сказал, что мог, постарался успокоить его. И он заканчивает это письмо тем, что этот разговор, тем, что у него завтра день рождения, и что лучший подарок для него был бы, если бы он эту премию не получил. Этот подарок ему был сделан, премию получил Далай-лама, с которым он потом очень подружил. И так что Гавел остался без Нобелевской премии мира, хотя он бы ее, безусловно, заслужил больше, чем многие другие. Вот я думаю, что это было подходяще напомнить вот этот эпизод, который остался таким который остался скрытым и который и Havel забыл. Я желаю вот нашей конференции удачи и надеюсь, что это начало новой традиции. Через год мы будем снова выбирать лауреата Международной премии Václava Havela. И я надеюсь, что мы, так сказать, снова найдем очень достойного кандидата. И я хочу попросить Наталью Пинчук, чтобы передала своему мужу при первой возможности нашу солидарность и наши самые хорошие пожелания. И я надеюсь, что хоть немного вот эта премия поможет улучшить его состояние в тюрьме, которое нелегкое. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Mr. Janouch, the chairman of the Charta 77 Foundation. And I would like to invite to the panel the moderator, Jacques Rupnik, who is the director of research at the Center of the International Studies and Research at Sciences Po in Paris and professor at the College of the Europe in Bruges. He has been visiting professor at several European universities and at Harvard, and he was executive director of the International Commission on Balkans. Consultant to the European Commission during the years 2007 and 10, member of the Independent International Commission in Kosovo 1999-2000, and he is a member of the Institute for Historical Justice and Reconciliation in The Hague since 2010. He has focused on democratization and European integration of East and Central European countries and nationalism and post-conflict reconciliation in Balkans, and has published several books on this topic. Mr. Rupnik is also a member of the board of Václav Havel Library, and we have the great pleasure to invite him today with Ladan Burubman, Svetlana Ganushkina, Rosa Maria Paja Acdevo, Bill Chipsy, Vincu Kviacorka, and Tent Kbiayo. Please come to the stage and the panel will start.
Dobré ráno, dámy a pánové. Doufám, funguje to? Funguje. Dobré ráno. Nebudu mluvit rusky, izviníte, ani ne česky, což bych nejradši. I will speak in English to make it simple for our panelists and for part of this audience. Great pleasure to be here and to open this colloquium with a very distinguished panel. I will just say a few words to introduce the subject of Václav Havel's legacy. and its international dimension. I think that if one looks back, there are at least three main features that for me remain important, and of course we will see whether this is the view shared by others. I will simply mention them without developing them. One, I think, is the legacy of reclaiming the language of rights in conditions of unfreedom. It's always difficult to define what freedom is, what a free society is. We all know, or at least people on this panel know, what unfreedom is. So that is the specific endeavor. That was the great meaning of Charta 77. But what I think remains is not just that engagement, or if you want, the activism associated with it. It was the fact that Havel was able to formulate the broader context, the philosophical underpinning of that commitment. And he described the inner workings, the mechanisms of a dictatorship, which were derived from the Czechoslovak situation of the 1970s in his essays, but which can be read in various parts of the world, which are translated in various parts of the world, which are today translated in China, in Egypt, in Iran, as I have discovered through our Iranian speaker yesterday. And of course, everybody in each situation, they read Havel differently. They read him and his discussion of the importance of human rights in a particular context, but they all see there an analysis about what is the logic of social control in a dictatorship, and also how fragile dictatorships can be, which is a source of hope for those who are committed in apparently hopeless situations. So that is why Havel is read, albeit very differently. The second point is that behind the defense of human rights, there is an individual's commitment, a quest for an inner freedom, which he called to live in truth. In 1985, on the Human Rights Day of the United Nations in December, he put it as follows: inner freedom, the independence of mind, and an openness to the deepest voices of one's conscience is the one contribution that each of us can make to make this world better. Without that inner commitment to freedom, human rights activism would be just that, activism. So this is very important, that individual personal commitment. And finally, this is what unites us in this panel, is the international dimension of human rights, which, for lack of a better word, I would call the right to interfere, which does not mean a self-proclaimed imperial ambition, but in the name of a shared responsibility for the world we live in. Charter 77 was such an invitation to interfere because it was demanding the implementation of international agreements in this country. And Václav Havel, as president, of course, practiced what he preached, whether it was on ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, whether it was when he spoke about Salman Rushdie when the fatwa was declared on him, his personal friendship with Dalai Lama, and I could go through the long list about what it meant, no longer as a dissident, but as a president, to keep the idea of human rights present in his policy. So the whole idea of looking for a shared moral minimum, this is what he was his sort of key phrase about how to engage in the international system. The quest for the moral minimum was another way of finding a way to make human rights a key question, key point in international affairs. Now, to discuss some of these issues that I have just only briefly mentioned, we have a very distinguished panel. I will not be reading all their biographies, which you have in the program. That would take most of the time devoted to this panel. I will very briefly introduce each of them in the order in which they will be speaking. The first speaker in the order I have been given is Ladan Burman. I have been privileged to meet her yesterday. I discovered that she's a brilliant Iranian historian and a human rights advocate, and that she's involved in the translation of works by major European thinkers into Persian. I understand Spinoza, Voltaire, Hannah Arendt, and Václav Havel are on the list. Well, this is a great company for Václav Havel, I think, to be in this distinguished club, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you in Prague.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubnik. And you said most of what we have to say, actually, about President Havel. When I first heard about President Havel's passing, I panicked. I thought, what will happen to us? And this is what was so important in part of President Havel, his presence and his protection of human rights activists around the world. But then there is Havel's legacy, and today we have lost a protector, but we still have a great teacher, and it's about his teaching that I would like to speak shortly, because there is so much to say about Havel. As an Iranian human rights activist, I know that Havel is already at work in Iran. We cannot now assess his impact on human rights and the fight for democracy. We will do it when democracy comes, when we can do studies. But today, as an Iranian human rights activist, I can bear witness to the crucial importance of Havel's teaching in our struggle for human rights. I received The Power of the Powerless in 2004, and though I knew and admired Václav Havel as an illustrious dissident, I must confess I had not read him. Understanding and clearly spelling out the truth through the factitious layers of totalitarian ideology requires a rare intellectual strength and self-confidence, which he had. But more important, speaking truth to the multitudes is a far more intimidating task than speaking truth to a tyrant. And that is precisely what Havel did in The Power of the Powerless. But in The Power of the Powerless, I also found comfort, as if the great man who had become my role model was retroactively approving of our project at the Abdurrahman Borumon Foundation. There, two sisters, Roya and myself, after witnessing the assassination of their father in Paris, amidst the indifference of the world, even including that of the democratic state that had given him asylum and protection, decided to take up the burden of their moral responsibility and stand up against evil. As Iranian exiles, powerless and far from home, we found that nonetheless we had power, the power of telling the truth about the victims, which we did by creating an online memorial where every single case of execution and extrajudicial killings could be documented without regards and to the charges or any other discrimination. Our intellectual encounter with Havel made us realize how urgently our fellow Iranian human rights activists, and indeed every Iranian citizen, needed to learn from Havel. In 2005, as part of our Human Rights and Democracy virtual project, we started to investigate what Persian translation of Havel's work were available. Havel's work became available in Iran in the late 1990s and early 21st century. Some of his plays, including the Vanek trilogy, The Garden Party, or Redevelopment, were translated into Persian. But until 2005, neither The Power of the Powerless nor Dear Dr. Husak, the two texts that established Havel as a prominent dissident, had been translated. That is why we requested and subsequently obtained President Havel's gracious authorization to translate 3 of his political essays, Dear Dr. Husak, The Power of the Powerless, and On the Meaning of Charter 77. On December 18, 2012, for the first anniversary of President Havel's passing, ABF released the translation of Dear Dr. Husak. Since then, the letter has been viewed 8,814 times on our website and 8,000 times on 2 other websites that, like ours, are blocked inside Iran. However, our library is available through proxies, and many other blogs and websites have posted the letter. For all of these, we don't have any statistics. So far, we know that the letter has been at least seen 18,000 times, which is remarkable, given that it has been up less than a year and had not been given any major publicity. This reception is not surprising for us, because we didn't choose these 3 texts accidentally. There is a tendency among us Iranians to think that our current regime is the outcome of our cultural, religious, and historical background. And for this reason, we cannot hope for a secular democracy comparable to those established in the West. Havel's minute and precise description of the social, political, and moral situation of his country under communist rule reveals an astonishing resemblance to the daily experience of Iranians under their post-totalitarian Islamist rule. Reading Dear Dr. Husak and The Power of the Powerless makes us feel less isolated and helps us understand that what we are experiencing is, after all, a variation on the theme of modern totalitarianism. More importantly, these selected essays, including The Meaning of Charter 77, were written when the situation appeared to be hopeless and when any attempt to react was dismissed with skepticism and cynicism in Czechoslovakia. And that is precisely when, instead of submitting to the rules established by the oppressor, Havel takes his pen and redefines the rules of the game. Suffice it to ponder the subversive nature of those 30 pages addressed to the almighty leader of his country. With a pen and an amazing strength of mind, in one stroke, the powerless dissident dismisses the ideological postulate of his adversaries and replaces with the only valid one, that of human dignity and freedom. Then, based on this new postulate, line after line, paragraph after paragraph, he transforms into an utter defeat what appeared to the world, to the government, and to his people a spectacular victory for the regime. By expressing his thoughts in the form of a letter, Havel calls upon the leadership to face its responsibility as he, as citizen, assumes his share of responsibility. The Power of the Powerless is the logical continuation of Dear Dr. Husak. He addresses his fellow citizens on the basis of their responsibility, and he demonstrates with the same rigorous analysis how, by their acquiescence in living a lie, they have become accomplices in their own oppression. And instead of seeking victory in the fall of the regime, he points to a different victory, one that depends only on each individual's will and decision to live in truth. Truth from Havel's standpoint. Thus, from Havel's standpoint, there is no defeat in engaging in the struggle for human rights. At worst, one restores one's own dignity and free will and reconnects to history and to human community. At best, one contributes to the establishment of free institutions in one's homeland. Given the time and circumstances of the writing of this text, when the perspective of democratic transition was bleak, one must admit that Havel had achieved an extraordinary tour de force. Ladies and gentlemen, if I were to summarize the human rights legacy of the late President Havel for all human rights advocates around the world, I would say thoughtfulness, hope, and resilience.
Thank you very much. Couldn't be put better, these last words, and thank you for this very thoughtful reading of Havel. I was particularly touched when you mentioned the translation in Persian of his famous essay, Dear Dr. Husak, that you because back in 1975 I translated it in French, and you can see how long sometimes it takes for text to travel, and here we are all discussing a text that we read at different times in our lives, and they mean different things in different situations. That's what makes it very interesting for us to turn now to our next speaker, Svetlana Ganushkina, who is a member of the Memorial Association in Moscow, a member of the Human Rights Center, and of the Civic Committee for Refugees and Migrants. She also asked me to add that she had left the Council for Human Rights that was a sort of quasi-government institution, as I understand it, after Vladimir Putin was elected for his second term in office. So the floor is yours.
Спасибо. Спасибо, друзья. Спасибо, дамы и господа. Спасибо, друзья. Для меня большая честь выступать на этом собрании. И я хочу сказать о том, что для меня Václav Havel и что такое его избрание в президенты Чешской Республики и долгое пребывание на этой должности. Это очень важно для нас всех, что такой человек стал руководителем государства. И это, мне кажется, делает честь народу Чехии, который доверил управление государством защитнику прав человека, высокому интеллигенту, творческой личности. Это крайне важно, что это произошло. Это был выбор интеллигенции, которая смогла доверять самой себе. И это был выбор народа. И оказалось, что это возможно. И оказалось, что человек, который никогда до этого не занимался управлением государственными структурами, в состоянии это делать, в состоянии окружить себя помощниками, которые смогут справиться с управлением как таковым и сможет вести к демократии и к развитию свой народ. Мы видим, как развивается Чехия и как она становится у нас на глазах, стала демократическим государством. Мы видим пример, редкий в мире пример, как мирным путем Чехословакия распалась на два государства, при этом сохранив уважение к гражданам второй половины с каждой стороны и обеспечив их возможностью иметь какие-то преференции в Чехии. Для словаков в Чехии, наоборот, законодательные преференции. Как люди остались в мире и не стали врагами ни в коем случае, остались братьями. И это редчайший пример в мире. И я думаю, что мы должны за этот пример поблагодарить Václava Havela. Это доверие, к сожалению, и этот пример оказался почти единственным среди стран бывшего соцлагеря, когда эти страны, бывшие лагерники, разошлись каждый в своем направлении и очень по-разному организовали свою будущую жизнь. Мы видим, сколько войн, сколько конфликтов проходит на территории наших бывших советских республик. Мы видим, как по-разному развиваются и другие страны. И мне очень жаль понимать, что наш народ, российский народ, не сделал такого выбора. Я все время задаю себе вопрос, почему это произошло? Почему интеллигенция не смогла доверять самой себе? Почему в тот момент, когда она имела большое влияние среди российского народа, почему в это время она сделала такой странный выбор? Почему у нас в России не нашлось своего Гавела? Я не могу ответить на этот вопрос. Мне кажется, что у нас не хватило доверия к самим себе, поэтому мы не пошли таким путем. Мне кажется, что именно поэтому вместо того, чтобы найти в своей среде такого Гавела или хотя бы Леха Валенсу, у нас не нашлось даже никого, кто бы сам решился взять на себя эту задачу, и не нашлось никого, кому бы мы выдвинули из своей среды. То есть интеллигенция оказалась неспособной доверять самой себе. Как сказал один правозащитник английский, у нас не нашлось даже Нельсона Манделы. В результате у нас появился руководитель, президент России из партократической среды. Почему-то была сделана ставка на него. А дальше с его помощью мы получили войны на территории России, и мы получили у власти человека из КГБ, который сегодня уничтожает в России гражданское общество. Мне кажется, что здесь уместно сказать об этом, потому что это наша большая проблема, и потому что мы нуждаемся в поддержке и солидарности для того, чтобы наше гражданское общество устояло. Я хочу сказать еще всего несколько слов о правах человека и о том, что вызывает у меня опасения. Концепция прав человека иногда называется западной концепцией. Вот мы только что слышали от коллеги из Ирана, что это пример, который дает надежду и для стран для других стран, с другими традициями, с другой несколько культурой, хотя мне кажется, что мы так связаны все на этой маленькой планете, что трудно говорить о каких-то принципиальных различиях в наших культурах и в нашем отношении к жизни и к наших потребностях. Но однако, на самом деле, мне кажется, что концепция прав человека – это огромное открытие человечества, и говорить о ней как о западной – это все равно, что называть английским закон всемирного тяготения, потому что он был открыт англичанином Исааком Ньютоном. Это приблизительно то же самое. Это действительно великое открытие человечества, от которого мы не должны отступить. Я вижу сейчас несколько направлений, в которых это отступление происходит. Я их только обозначу. Первое – это утверждение, что концепция прав человека устарела, что она требует модернизации. Я согласна с тем, что она требует развития. Да, конечно, она требует развития, как и все живое. А право – это нечто живое, это живой организм, и он требует развития. Но при этом говорить о том, что эта концепция устарела, невозможно, потому что, мне кажется, только таким образом мы можем сохранить, громко говоря, сохранить жизнь на этой планете. В противном случае, если мы не будем двигаться в этом направлении, при такой невероятном развитии техники сегодняшнего дня, это кончится может гораздо раньше, чем, может быть, мы могли бы просуществовать и продлить нашу цивилизацию. Вторая опасность – это утверждение о несоответствии концепции прав человека некоторым национальным традициям и культурам. Мне приходится много говорить об этом с нашими кавказскими соотечественниками, со студентами из республик, где сейчас как раз проводится вот эта самая идея. И мне очень приятно слышать, что, в общем, наш коллега из страны, из Ирана, из мусульманской страны, говорит об этой концепции как о необходимой и как о будущем, о том, что может развивать в будущем историю этой страны и ее культуры. У нас сейчас очень много идет разговоров о том, что у нас есть какая-то особая культура Кавказа, особые права, которые не соответствуют концепции прав человека, и это должно быть рассмотрено именно в рамках этой культуры. Конечно, это так, невозможно отказаться от своей культуры, но при этом она вполне может развиваться на основании вот этих абсолютных ценностей. Многие молодые люди соглашаются со мной, а некоторые нет. И вот однажды на такой встрече, где присутствовало несколько девушек из Чеченской Республики, девушек с покрытой головой, конечно, одетых в традиционную мусульманскую одежду, и мы с ними обсуждали вопрос одного из основных прав человека – это право на жизнь. И обсуждали такую простую вещь – может ли быть наказана девушка за якобы дурное поведение убийством. И одна из девушек сказала: да, конечно, это правильно, если она сразу не подчинилась тому, что ей говорит семья, она должна быть убита. Я спросила двух других, согласны ли они, и они кивнули, сказали, что согласны. Мне было очень грустно и страшно это слышать. Но когда я спустилась вниз и одевалась для того, чтобы уйти с этого собрания, эти две девушки, оказывается, ждали меня внизу. Они сказали мне: спасибо, что вы говорите об этом, потому что мы не смеем это произнести. Мы не могли при ней это сказать, потому что иначе мы не сможем вернуться домой. И это происходит в стране, которая считает себя страной, безусловно, цивилизованной, передовой, даже демократической. И однако вот нам приходится с этим сталкиваться. И третье – это то, что права человека могут быть отложены в дальний ящик на время борьбы с терроризмом. Это огромная проблема в мире, действительно, сегодня. Но в то же время никакой другой платформы, как платформа демократии и прав человека, не может быть предложена для того, чтобы бороться с терроризмом. Иначе мы становимся на точку зрения террористов, на точку зрения коллективной ответственности, коллективной вины и коллективного наказания. И это, к сожалению, направление я часто встречаю и на Западе. И я надеюсь, что мы отстоим наши ценности и что мы продолжим именно движение в том направлении, в котором нам указано в работах основоположников прав человека, в том числе и Václava Havela. Спасибо.
Thank you very much for showing how human rights may mean different things in different cultures, that the war on terror raises important questions about the fate of human rights in our democratic societies as well. You ask why Russia has no Havel. That is a question that that nobody can answer. But there was a figure that came close to what Václav Havel represented, and that was Andrei Sakharov. He was, I mean, the nearest thing that Russia had as an intellectual, as an internationally renowned intellectual scientist who spoke out for human rights and who entered the political scene after 1989. So perhaps there is some parallel there. But anyway, that will be for discussion later. Our time is running out, and I'll seek instructions from the organizers about our time limit for the coffee break because we clearly will have difficulty meeting the time limit. Our next speaker comes from Cuba. It's Rosa Maria Paya Acevedo. She's active in the Christian liberation movement in Cuba. And of course, her name, Paya, is for, I think, many of us in this room, evokes the name of Osvaldo Paya, the well-known Cuban dissident who died in tragic circumstances. So delighted to have you here in Prague.
Thank you. Dear panelists, guests, thank you all so much. It is my privilege and honor to be here today and to speak on this session of Prague Crossroads 2013 about civic society, a place where, as we know, freedom is not taken for granted. Our congratulations to Natalia Pinchuk for the awards of Ales Bailats in the position in Cuba. We also know very well the constant risk that it means to have a loved one unjustly in prison. Václav Havel and my father, Osvaldo Paya, kept a very dear and deep friendship. It was through my father that I get to know about Václav Havel teachings. Now they are both in God's hands, and their names are also in history as pioneers of a new kind of liberation, involving not only the political level, but all aspects of human beings. This is a process that from the beginning comes from the heart of the person who wants to live in truth, and that transforms this person into a transformer of society. Where it seems there was not hope, you, Havel, raised hope, and your message reached Cuba. My father said that in his speech for Václav Havel Memorial Tribute. That active hope is a model to follow for all Cubans today. My country is living a critical period that will define the future of the island in the coming years. In these times, Cuba can move toward democracy in a definitive manner. But this process is in danger because of the fraudulent change that the government is trying to impose in order to keep all the power and all the people's resources until the last possible moment. Repression and political harassment are still ongoing in Cuba in order to dominate a large number of citizens. The law violates our rights, and the actions of the government violate both law and rights. Poverty affects most Cuban families, which are with their hands tied by the lack of self-management and by the so-called economic reforms that are also a fraud, since private enterprise are not allowed, nor are free entrepreneurs recognized, and therefore such reforms do not empower our citizenship. The government continues to decide who can and who cannot have a domestic business, as well as who can travel outside Cuba and who cannot. The difference between the privileged majority means access to all resources and the marginal majority is growing, and this will be a problem for a future with democracy. The culture of simulation as a result of fear, of repression and of exclusion constitutes an anthropological damage that is affecting our society today. The Cuban government despised our fellow citizens and mocked on the international community when Cuban officials openly proclaimed a few weeks ago at the Human Rights Council of United Nations that they will not take any steps to ensure democracy in our country. All this while they refuse even to mention in our national press about the weapons in fully operative conditions using merchant ships in civil canal, thus violating Panama's national security and several United Nations resolutions on the North Korean dictatorships and putting in risk innocent life. Neither do they mention the high rates of suicide and the incidence of HIV in the Cuban population. They keep absolute controls on mass media and official education, where religious schools are prohibited. They denied access to information, freedom of expression, and the peaceful association of citizens. Furthermore, the government has been violating its own constitution with impunity during a decade because it has not responded to the call for a plebiscite that more than 25,000 Cubans have demanded through the Varela Project. The regime doesn't hide that it rejects with impunity any investigation of the attacks that ended the life of my father and Harold Cepero. It does this before the complicit eyes of some in the international community, which, like the Spanish government, insists on accepting the version of the same power that, for years, threatened to kill my father and that rammed his car on the day he died. Yet, government violence against human rights defenders grows. Those who decided to live in the truth became civic activists on the island. They know that they can face isolation, violent assaults, stigma, imprisonment, and even death. While all this is happening, we realize that many in the world want to abandon Cuban people and cooperate with these fraudulent changes. So that those who have all the power today remain in power forever, excluding the will of our people and compromising our future. Václav Havel was always an exception, embodying the life in truth, never supporting the fraudulent changes, calling for a true liberation, even in his last moments. With his example, as my father said, we are fighting for the changes that unequivocally will mean freedom, rights, free elections, and reconciliation between men who are no longer afraid of one another. So far, the only real transformation is taking place in the minds and hearts of Cubans. It is time to begin the process of reconciliation we all want, because what we want is to live in harmony and freedom. Long ago, the people have lost confidence in the regime, and despite repression and apathy, Cubans more and more are no longer dominated by fear. We are inspired by the liberation symbolized by the fall of the Berlin Wall, a wall that did not crush either of the two parts involved, and that, in the words of my fathers, became a bridge instead. So, the struggle of the Cubans is a peaceful struggle. It's not with violence that democracy is established, as the recent genocides in Syria and Egypt sadly confirm. My father taught us that it's better not to be dominated by fear and do not to hold hate in our hearts, but to work with love for the future where life is respected, as the environment and individual and economic freedoms must be respected too. Death threats, arbitrary arrest, beatings and persecution have failed to stop Cubans in their struggle for real changes. We do not want to live in a lie. Our wish is to be happy and prosper with the fruits of our labor and imagination. My father and Havel knew that wherever people create a free civic space, then all kind of intimidation disappears. And this civic space are growing in Cuba today, despite the violent response of the repressors. We can see the different initiative of the opposition and also among young people and their cultural expression through journalism and independence blogs, and in a space that were shaped initially with work citizen committees of the Varela Project, an initiative based in constitution seeking changes with the law to guarantee fundamental rights. The opposition inside and outside Cuba agree in defending a roadmap for transition called Path of the People. We hope for your solidarity with the demands of this proposal in the context of thousands of Cuban citizens. Ask for your support in our demand for a plebiscite with the antecedent of the Varela Project, the only legal and massive free expression of the Cuban people in 54 years. It is a plebiscite to ask the people whether or not they want plural and free elections. We need the help of the international community and organizations like yours to stop the violent repression of Cuban state security against members of the democratic movement in the island, so we can continue fighting for real changes. We need to insist on demanding an independent investigation to clarify the circumstance of the attack of my father and Harold Cepero last year, searching for the end to the impunity that the Cuban government has, which is a growing threat to all the citizens of my country. Today, the words that Havel wrote to my father 9 years ago has turned prophetic. He said, "Dear friend, although I have repeated several times that every Democrat opponent and dissident of the totalitarian regime must act today as if the power would not be handed over tomorrow, or as if the power were to be handed over tomorrow, in these lines I would like to add something more. Anyone who sympathizes or supports such a totalitarian government should also realize that the power can be handed over tomorrow. It is up to him. He still has the possibility to start acting according to this reality. This possibility is now real for all democracies in the world. Today, we all have the opportunity to look at the people instead of looking to the powerful, to ensure precisely the right of the powerless. We are aware that as my father claimed, human beings of all races, cultures, religions, and those with not religion, women, children, elderly, and each and every human being have the right to have rights. Rights create a climate of trust, order and justice. Rights are essential, but they are not enough on their own if there is no love. And my father and Václav Havel do believe that there is love, even in the middle of the danger and anguish that distress us. We still have a hope, for we have a past, that is the past of the people for the Cubans. If there is not love, we know that we cannot build peace on the earth and the peace with the earth. Let us write hope in Cuba and everywhere. Thank you so much. God help us all.
Thank you very much, Rosa Maria Paya, for your intervention. And our next speaker, Bill Shipsey, is a lawyer by profession based in Dublin. He's the founder of the Art for Amnesty Award and the initiator of the Ambassador of Conscience Award, which I understand is a twin or forerunner of the Václav Havel Prize. So,
thank you very
much.
Thank you, Jacques, very much. Exactly 10 years ago this month, Václav Havel stepped off a plane in my hometown of Dublin, dropped his wife to the hotel, and proceeded to go drinking until 3 in the morning with Bono and Edge from U2. We discovered that despite our cultural differences, the Irish and the Czechs like to drink late into the night. He then, on the following evening, stepped onto the stage of our famous Irish National Theatre to receive the inaugural Amnesty International Ambassador of Conscience Award from the hands of Irish Nobel Literature Laureate Seamus Heaney. On that night in the Abbey Theatre, Seamus Heaney jokingly claimed that in giving the keynote address and, in a sense, trying to upstage Václav Havel, he felt like a cuckoo in the Abbey nest. I know the feeling. I feel like a cuckoo in the Crossroads nest, included as I am on a panel with so many great and distinguished human rights defenders. The only excuse the organisers of this conference can have had to include me is that I am an ambassador of sorts for artists through my modest contribution with Art for Amnesty, which I founded. And perhaps it is permissible, if not appropriate, for me to address this panel discussion on behalf of the artists, particularly since Václav Havel was himself an artist before he was a dissident, and an artist long before he became a politician. By all the normal and ordinary rules, however, Václav should now merely figure as a deceased statesman, someone who had stepped back into the tapestry of late 20th century history. But this has not happened and certainly will not happen to him. He has not been subsumed into the realms of the history books and thereby both relegated and forgotten. And the reason for this is that he belongs in the mythical Tír na nÓg. Tír na nÓg is a mythical Irish land which is the land of eternal youth. It's the land of intellect and imagination. It's the ever-young land of art, the land of complete human awareness. And what is so special for me about this conference is not only coming back to a city I regard as my second home city, but it is that so many human rights defenders have congregated in this deconsecrated church for the right reasons, for the right person, and in the right place. We are here, of course, to celebrate the announcement of the first Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, a long-established award renamed in his honour. But I want to speak not in the name of human rights, but in the name of art. There are many others more qualified than me to speak on human rights, and I want to speak in the name of the art that Václav Havel believed in, an art that is fully alive to reality and fully truthful in its response. What the Russian poet and one-time Prague resident Marina Tsvetaeva called art in the light of conscience. It is an art born from the same influence that drove Václav to write his famous open letter to Husak in 1975. When asked why he wrote his challenge, he replied, "I felt that if I said what I thought, I'd be contributing to the process of social self-awareness. I simply wrote it in the belief that it might have, let's say, a certain socio-hygienic significance. In general, I believe it's better to tell the truth in all circumstances." Art is born from a similar impulse. Art does not issue from a sense of duty. It is one of the rewards of inner and outer freedom that one of the other speakers referred to. The writer's pen and the minstrel's harp are insignia of the liberated spirit and are recognized as such everywhere instinctively. No writer or politician in our time has carried the weight of responsibility more nobly or stood his ground in what Seamus Heaney called the indicative mood of the truth more firmly than Václav Havel. As Seamus Heaney observed in Dublin in October 2003, Václav Havel's word was his bond in more ways than one. It bound him to speak truth to power, and it led him into the bonds of his jailers. And like another great dramatist from my country, Oscar Wilde, another truth-teller who went to prison out of pride and integrity, Václav Havel wrote De Profundis. He used his pen as a spade to tunnel into the light, and in so doing had a most powerful influence and effect on everyone engaged in the affirmation of human rights and human dignity. Concluding his speech for Václav Havel in 2003, Seamus Heaney said that he was, quote, the Athenian of our times, one for whom principles and affections were sacrosanct, one who, like Antigone, refused to betray a personal sense of transcendent right and whose integrity thereby served the res publica more vitally and effectively than any plot or party. And indeed, lines from a chorus in Sophocles' play Antigone, written over 2,000 years ago, could have been written for Václav Havel. When he yields to his gods, when truth is the treadle of his loom and justice the shuttle, he will be shown respect. The city will reward him. In conclusion, and in honor of two of the greatest men I have had the pleasure and privilege to know, Václav Havel and Seamus Heaney, who died quite recently, I will leave you with some lines from a poem by Seamus Heaney called The Hall Lantern. I have learned since I arrived in Prague that the linden tree is the Czech tree and was a preferred tree of Václav Havel, not only because its leaves are heart-shaped, but for Seamus Heaney, the haw tree, with its winter-bearing red berries, was his tree of choice. And here are just 3 lines from that poem, which could have summed up what Václav Havel tried to do and what many human rights defenders tried to do. The wintry haw is burning out of season. Crab of the thorn, a small light for small people, wanting no more from them, but that they keep the wick of self-respect from dying out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill Shepsey, for this evocation of Václav Havel from Dublin, Václav Havel in Dublin, and what he told you about the letter to Dr. Husak, which, of course, probably was not read by Dr. Husak ever, but was addressed to everybody else, including, as we discover, in all the countries that are here represented. Our next speaker is Vinchuk Večorka, who comes from the country of our laureate, so this is very appropriate, and I'm sure perhaps he will tell us something about him or about the situation in Belarus. He's a former head of the Belarusian Popular Front, and he represents the Supolnost Civil Society Center. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear friends. I hope Václav Havel would be satisfied with yesterday's decision. He followed the situation in Belarus. He personally met Ales Beliatsky several times. He knew from the first hand about his views and his activities. But maybe Havel would not be happy enough because Ales is behind bars. He is in strong conditions there. He is isolated even from his cellmates. There is pressure on him to write an appeal for pardon, and he refuses. And the black propaganda against him in the state media labels him every day. Not only Ales, but also Nikolai Statkevich, Nikolai Autukhovich, Pavel Severinets, Eduard Lobov, all the 10 internationally recognized political prisoners now are behind bars. Ales began his mission very early. He was 19 since 1981. He was one of the most active and brave participants of Belarus youth pro-independence movement against Russification, against Soviet communism. He prepared and distributed samizdat, built networks, and he was fully ready for new political opportunities at the end of the 80s. Was an organizer of dozens of mass actions commemorating victims of Stalinist terror suffered because of this. Was among organizers of the vast movement, Belarus Popular Front, and in fact was among those people who paved the way for a new epoch for independent Belarus. But unfortunately, after a short period of relative democracy, Lukashenko, as populists speculating on Soviet nostalgia, came into power. This is an illustration of Havel's trouble on reversibility of freedom. And Ales naturally turned his face from politics to human rights defense. And the violation of people's rights, not only civil and political, but also socio-economical, is an endless field for activities of human rights defenders in today's Belarus. Freedom of expression and freedom of association either do not exist or are limited to small reservations. The same is to be said about cultural, especially in Belarusian language, and educational activities. The destiny of 3 politicians and journalists disappeared 14 years ago remains uninvestigated. In comparison with Soviet times, there is limited space for private economic initiative, but one is allowed to carry it out only under condition of political loyalty. Not Havelian language of freedom, but Orwellian language of propaganda, perfectly analyzed by Havel. There are no elections in Belarus. Okay, the performance called elections does exist, but since 2010, the ballots, even dropped or replaced by commission members, aren't counted at all. In a situation when political activities are limited, civil activities are regarded as politicized by the regime. And politicians without elections often act as dissidents, as civil activists. Sometimes we hear from foreign observers, you are no longer politicians, you became mere dissidents. This would mean that we are romanticists, proud of values, but hopelessly far from pragmatism and this way from chances to grip the power. However, such values as human dignity can mobilize people for the change even stronger than economic problems only. Václav Havel has successfully challenged this choice. Can politics be moral in our times or not? Is the dissident able to become an effective politician? Quotation, despite all the political misery I am confronted with every day, it still is my profound conviction that the very essence of politics is not dirty. Dirt is brought in only by wicked people, end of quote. There is an expectation of clean and honest politics in our society, tired after 19 years of Lukashenko. The level of estrangement of people from the authorities is growing and now reaches, according to last remaining sociologists, 2/3. Some time ago, Western political gurus began convincing Belarusian Democrats that there is a chance to re-educate Lukashenko, that there are pro-Western pigeons within his clique, and that Lukashenko can become a defender of fragile independence of Belarus. This alluded that critical attitude, weakening the dictatorship, at the same time weakens the independence of the country, threatened by newly reborn Kremlin's imperial ambitions. However, it is current leader who agrees to place new Russian Air Force base in Belarus, who includes our country in the next configuration of Soviet, now so-called Eurasian integration. Independence of our country is the good to be sold to Russia for Lukashenko remaining on power. It is indisputable that only free society can secure real sovereignty of the country. It's risky to make parallels between countries. However, typological similarities do exist. Havel was concerned with European appeasement of Cuban dictatorship. He told, the European Union is dancing to Fidel Castro's tune, and he denounced protecting the interests of Spanish corporations in Cuba's government-controlled tourism industry. It's hard to imagine a more shameful deal, said Havel. What would Havel say about today's deals of European companies with Lukashenko's oligarchs and about ice hockey championship in Minsk scheduled to the next year, when political prisoners still are where they are? Something consistent, I think, for the man who turned Lukashenko's regime in Belarus the disgrace of Europe. Every concession is regarded by such regimes not as a will for compromise, but as a weakness. And it's a mistake to regard Belarus society as far from idea of change. According to recent polls, the sympathies for European integration prevail in our society and are at least 10% stronger than the same moods for Eastern direction. This is our care in Belarus to convert these moods in the society into its practical efforts for change. We know that sometimes such moves come unexpectedly. I think we can formulate the Havel's testament in defending freedom in words of old proverb: do what you ought, come what may, and the result comes. More than 30 years ago, Ales and me as students worked on archaeological excavations in the courtyard of Mirsky Castle. It was an epoch of Brezhnev, and Havel was in prison. We prepared the message to our descendants, where we were sworn to fight against totalitarianism, for freedom for people, and independence for the nation. The message was paraffined, put into a bottle, and buried to a depth of 5 meters. It lies there to this day. Lukashenko, or any other dictator, can't destroy it, as well as nobody can't break Ales's oath, his will for truth and freedom. This is Havel's lesson. The brutal force isn't able to destroy the moral leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The hidden message in Belarus of Havel's legacy. His engagement, you're right to point how sustained his engagement with Belarus was. At the Forum 2000, he several times invited Mr. Milinkiewicz as a representative of Belarus opposition. And he has been one of the few European politicians consistently engaged with the situation there. Our last speaker, Mr. Teng Biao, is a human rights lawyer and lecturer from China. He's a leading campaigner against death penalty in that country, and we're pleased to have him as the last speaker on this panel.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Václav Havel is very influential among Chinese intellectuals and human rights activists. He paid a lot of attention to human rights situation in China, especially after 1989. His analysis of post-totalitarianism and the power of the powerless living in truth is so persuasive and so powerful. And the Chinese situation is very similar to the communism Czechoslovakia. His books, most important book, Power of the Powerless, was translated into Chinese more than 10 years ago, but it was forbidden to publish. One of the translators, Mr. Beiling, is here now, and he was forbidden to go back to China. Inspired by Václav Havel and Charter 77, Dr. Liu Xiaobo, together with other human rights defenders and independent scholars, initiated the Charter 08, and Václav Havel played a very important role to help Dr. Liu Xiaobo to get the Nobel Peace Prize in 2010. And I've got a T-shirt here. It's Charter 08. So sometimes we human rights activists wearing this T-shirt, go to the street and it's dangerous to wear this shirt in China, but many people like to wear it, and I will research to Charter 77 Foundationn and Václav Havel Library if you don't have it, also inspired by Václav Havel, my colleague Dr. Xu Zhiyong. He is the main organizer of the so-called New Citizen Movement, and he wrote several articles directly. Some ideas directly from Václav Havel. For example, he wrote the politics should be good and clean. And in Chinese context, politics is considered as dirty, evil, and telling lies. But Havel obviously said it's not true. Politics should be good, and we also organized a movement called Citizen Commitment. So this idea is directly from living in truth, and I think to myself he is one of the most important writers in my spiritual life. So I participated in the human rights movement since 2003, and we pushed forward the rights defense movement and the New Citizen movement. And I also organized a NGO to campaign for abolition of death penalty. And as Havel predicted, we human rights defenders have to pay bills if we do such things. So I lost my lawyer's license before the Beijing Olympic Games, and my passport was confiscated, and I can't go abroad for five years, and I was banned from teaching for 2 times in my university, and I was kidnapped 2 times and detained in a secret place. During detention, I was beaten, and I was forced to wear handcuffs 24 hours a day, lasting 36 days. But the physical torture is not the most horrible. I think spiritual torture is very very terrible. During detention, I was monitored by 2 or 3 secret policemen, and I can't read. There's no books, no television, and I can't write letters. And my family member didn't know where I am, and I don't know what will happen in tomorrow. So it's a total solitary confinement, and it's a totally isolation. So during detention, Václav Havel's thoughts, his image, his spirit became a strong source of my persistence, of my spiritual integrity. Without this, I would be down. I would be lost in desperate and fear. Václav Havel seems to be the hope of the hopeless during according to my experience. Recently, the human rights situation is getting worse. Since the end of this March, there are more than 170 human rights defenders arrested and detained. But more and more Chinese people stand up to fight for human rights and freedom, because we cannot accept a political system which is against human nature. Many Chinese people are inspired by a sentence. I think it's also related to Iran revolution. It says, you can crush the flowers, but you cannot stop the spring. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this connection, Charter 77, Charter 08, I think sums up what this panel is really, what this panel is about. And thanks for the T-shirt for the Charter. FRANTIŠEk, I know who will be wearing it, if it's XXL, if it's the right size. The bad news is officially our time has run out. The good news is we've been given 5 minutes extra. I just first wanted to ask the panelists if they want to respond. They don't have to, but if they want to respond to something they've heard during our panel, if they would want to briefly respond, and then we perhaps have time for 1 or 2 questions, very brief questions from the audience. So, yes?
About cultural relativism that has been underlying the discussion that human rights is Western. And is solitary confinement a universal trait? Arresting civil rights activists? We have it in China. When our Chinese friend was speaking, I was hearing Iran. So there is a universal trait, both in tyranny and in human dignity. So let's forget about cultural relativism.
Good. I support that. Yeah, very important question. There are different cultural settings, different ways of reading human rights, but certainly the universality of human dignity and the principle that you've just referred to. So I don't know whether others on the panel wish to respond. Sure. Yes? Пожалуйста.
Да, я хочу сказать, что уж во всяком случае несчастье у нас общее. И тут никакого релятивизма нет, потому что то, что рассказывал наш китайский коллега, к сожалению, сейчас бытует и в России, и относится не только к активистам и оппозиционерам. Часто пытки и такие Вот страшные муки испытывают люди просто для того, чтобы сотрудники правоохранительных органов отчитались выполнения плана. Я хочу задать вопрос коллеге из Китая, если можно. Да? Я хочу спросить, как вы считаете, есть ли надежда на то, что в какое-то обозримое время Лю Сяобо и, может быть, другие китайские политзаключенные выйдут на свободу? Есть ли какое-то продвижение и как мы можем помочь в этом отношении?
Yeah, thank you. I hope Dr. Liu Xiaobo can be released soon, but it seems the Chinese government tends to detain him, and they don't release him, but also they put Liu Xiaobo's wife, Liu Xia, under strict house arrest. She cannot visit anybody, and nobody is permitted to visit her. So Liu Xia is not involved in politics. He's only Liu Xiaobo's wife. So things is very very bad to him.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, just to prove that we care for human rights and for your freedom of expression, we have a chance for one question from the audience. If there is an urgent, burning need to express, to voice, you have a chance to ask a question. Any of the panelists? See, yes, there is a question at the back.
Hi, my name is Beata Bernico. I am a journalist, and my question is, Mr. Bayo, hopefully I am pronouncing it at least right. You were just speaking basically against the politics, against the human rights politics of the Chinese government. Are you not afraid there will be any consequences when you come back to China with your school? You are teaching with the university you are teaching on, or with the government?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Many of my friends who are the organizers of New Citizen Movement have been detained, and many friends of mine told me it's very possible that I will be arrested and detained after I go back. And they suggest me to stay in Hong Kong because I teach in Hong Kong now, but I feel I have to come back to China. First, my wife and my daughters live in mainland China. Second, I feel it's my responsibility to continue my fight for human rights in China. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this panel is coming to a close. I will not try to summarize. I think we've heard a lot about how in different situations the human rights predicament can be read, interpreted, confronted. That is very much part of Havel's legacy. There is also the other part of Havel's legacy, not just in conditions of unfreedom, but as a democratic politician. You have to try to preserve that commitment and to translate it into something that is called foreign policy or European policy. And this is also part of Havel's legacy. He, in 2008, was in Brussels to launch the European Partnership for Democracy, and which now there is a new initiative called the European Endowment for Democracy. But the basic idea is that you cannot just in foreign policy look after economic interest or trade interest. That at the end of the day, that question of human rights, you have to try as Europeans, not just as individual countries, try to promote it in our European international policy. So this is part of Havel's legacy. We will have a chance to continue this discussion later on. We have a time for a coffee break now. I thank all the panelists for their very interesting presentations, and we will continue in about 10 minutes.